We continue now at the top of Daf Tesvavam and Beis Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 15b. On the previous summit, the Gemara said that Rav Huna would sell a cow to an idol worshiper, and he was not concerned with any of the concerns that were mentioned on the previous summit. Now, all of the concerns that were mentioned, the concerns all revolve around the idea that the idol worshiper is going to use the animal for working, and so therefore one of the concerns, for example, is maybe you're going to come to lend it to the idol worshiper, and then he's going to use it on Shabbos, but it really still will be an animal that belongs to the Jew. Another concern the Gemara had was Nisione, was you're going to test the animal out right before Shabbos. It's going to end up being Mechamer Acher Behemto on Shabbos because the owner is going to be there, and the owner is going, by the voice of the owner, the animal is going to go carry a load, and that would be a problem. And so in any case, the Gemara in the previous summit said that Rav Huna said it's not a problem to sell the animal, to sell, let's say, a cow to a non-Jew, to the idol worshiper, if there's a possibility that the idol worshiper is going to slaughter the animal. So for example, a kosher animal, even though idol worshippers don't keep kosher, but the kosher animals are generally the ones that people eat. So if you sell that kind of an animal to an idol worshiper, we can assume, we can be talin on lakula, that really he's just going to slaughter it, and therefore it's permitted. You don't have to have any of those concerns that were mentioned on the previous summit. And the Gemara continues and says, now where do we know that we say such a thing, that we can be lenient in such a fashion? Rashi explains, how do we know that if you have a situation where we're able to say, by a situation of lifnei iver, by a sale, where we're able to say some kind of a leniency, some kind of a reasoning that results in a leniency, like maybe he will use it for such and such, so then we're going to be lenient. Now we should point out over here, and the Gemara is going to point out as well, that the Gemara of the previous Amud was not talking about lifnei iver. They were not talking about lifnei iver lo sita and michshol, that by selling this thing, then this person's going to commit an avera. That was not the concern. The concern was you're selling a large animal to the Avodah Zara, and then something is going to happen to the animal which actually will be an isser, which will be problematic for the Jew who sold the animal. Again, it's going to be that maybe you're going to come to lend or rent the animal to the non-Jew, and the animal will do work on Shabbos. It's the Jew's animal, essentially, in that case. Or again, you're going to test out the animal right before Shabbos, into Shabbos, and again, the Jew will be in violation of Shabbos. But nevertheless, it's very similar to lifnei iver, because by lifnei iver, sometimes you might sell something to someone, whether Jew or non-Jew, and they might commit an avera. And do we say the same kind of logic? Well, if there's a possibility that they won't do the avera, talin on lakula, we'll assume they're going to use it for some other purpose, and that's kind of what Rav Huna did. Rav Huna said that when you're selling the large animal to the idol worshiper, you can assume that he's going to shech the animal. You don't have to assume he's going to do he's going to do these actions which will have those problematic issues that were mentioned in the previous element. So that's what the Gemara here is saying. Now, where do we find, let's say by lifnei iver, that we can be talin on lakula? Tetanan, because we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah Meseches Shvius. Beis Shammai say, Lo yimchor adam para hachoreshes b'shvius. You can't sell, a person can't sell a cow that is used for plowing on the Shemitah year. That's like lifnei iver, because now you're selling it, let's say, to a Jew who is chashad ala shvius, that we're afraid he might violate shvius, and he's going to use this cow to plow on the Shemitah year. That would be an issue of lifnei iver, but that's what Beis Shammai say. Beis Hillel matir, but Beis Hillel say, no, it's mutter, because it's possible that he's going to shech the animal. You don't know what he's going to do. And so you see, Beis Hillel is being talin on lakula. They're assuming he might shech the animal, just like Rav Huna on the previous Amud, when he sold the parah to the idol worshiper. Maybe there's a possibility he's going to shech the animal, so it's not a problem. But the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Mi dummy, can you really compare the two? And really the Gemara here is just going to make the same point that we just made a moment ago, that that's talking about lifnei iver, but on the previous Amud we're talking about an actual direct violation to the seller. Is it really comparable? Hasam ein adam mitzuva al shvisas behemto b'shvius. When it comes to an animal, so a person is not commanded that his animal has to rest on the Shemitah year. That's not the issue over there. The issue over there is lifnei iver, that you're selling the animal to the buyer, and the buyer might commit an avera with that animal. But over here, Adam Mitzuva al Shvisas Behemto B'Shabbos, it's not simply an issue of lifnei iver. The person is commanded that his animal needs to rest on Shabbos. And again, as we said, you have that problem that maybe you're going to lend the animal, maybe you'll rent the animal, and his animal will then be doing work on Shabbos. So you can't compare the two. But the Gemara says, 1 second. Abai said to him, but 1 second, you think that would mean that any time that the person is commanded about, let's say, the animal or whatever the object is, it would suddenly suddenly be forbidden, I'll bring you a case where there is the person himself, the seller himself is commanded, and we're mekel. What about a field? The adam mitzuva al shvisa sadeo b'shvius, a person is commanded that his field should rest in the Shemitah year. Utananim, we learned in the Mishnah, Beis Shammai omrim, Beis Shammai say, lo yimchor adam sada near b'shvius, a person is not allowed to sell a field that is plowed already on the Shemitah year, because we're afraid that the person he's selling to is going to go ahead and he's going to plant in that field. We'll note over here, even though it says here utanan, we learned in a Mishnah, but the Mesoras Hashas says that it actually should be Vitanya, we learned in a Brisa, so this is a Brisa. In any case, again, it says Beis Shammai is concerned. Ubeis Hillel matir, but Beis Hillel say no, it's mutter to sell the field. And they should yachol ovir, because there's a possibility that he's not going to work the field, that he's just going to not plant it, let it lay fallow, essentially. And so therefore, again, talinon lakula. And in here, in this situation, we actually have a direct violation that a person's field is supposed to be resting on the Shemitah year. And so therefore, you see again, if we're able to be talinon lakula, we are talinon lakula. But the Gemara now asks in the other direction. Rav Ashi asks, let's say any situation where the person himself is not commanded and all we have is lifnei iver. Shari, do you think that means it's automatically permitted? It's not true. We're not always lenient. What about vessels? What about tools? A person is not commanded in terms of resting his tools on the Shemitah year. And yet we learned in the Mishnah says, this is in Mesechet, the following vessels cannot be sold in the Shemitah year: hamachresha, v'chol keila, the plow, everything that goes together with that, ha'ol, the yoke, v'hamizra, v'hadeker, and the winnowing fork and the stake. All of these items, the person is not supposed to sell them in the Shemitah year. It comes to, again, Shvisas Kalim. The seller himself doesn't have that commandment of that he has to make sure his Kalim don't work. It's just that the person is not allowed to use the Kalim to do work. And so therefore that's a situation of Lifnei Iver, and we're strict in that situation. We are not Talin on Lakula in that case. And so the Gemara says, Elam Rav Ashi, rather Rav Ashi says, actually it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a situation where the person is commanded that the item should be resting or whatever might be similar to that. And it doesn't matter if you're just talking about Lifnei Iver. The rule is as follows. Anytime you have a situation where there's a possibility of assuming lakula, of assuming a leniency, that the person buying it is not going to do with it what you're concerned about, even if there's a commandment about that object, that again, let's say this person's animal should be resting, even in that situation, if you can be talin on lakula, we are lenient. And if you have a situation where there's really nothing you can say lakula, there's no assumption that you can make that would result in a leniency that you could reasonably say would happen, so lo talinan, so then we're not making in that case, even though there's no specific command, even though all we're talking about is lifnei iver. And the Gemara continues, Rabba Zovina Uchamra Yisrael Hachoshid Limchar Lovet Kochavim. Rabba, he sold a donkey to a Jew, and there was a suspicion that the Jew would sell it to an idol worshiper. So here in this situation, he's not selling it to the idol worshiper, but he's selling it to someone who might sell it to an idol worshiper. And again, the donkey should not be sold to an idol worshiper. Over here, you're not going to shecht. Most people are not eating the chamor, they're not eating a donkey, as Rashi over here says, Chamra Lekol Lemisli B'Shchita. There already you can't assume that maybe it will be shechted. And so he sold the donkey to a Jew, and the concern was he might sell it to a non-Jew, but he did that anyway. So Abai said to him, he said to Rabbi, my time of Marhachi. He said, why did the master do that? I thought you're not supposed to sell. He said, he said, well, what's the problem? I'm selling to a Jew, I'm not selling to an idol worshiper. So Abai said to him, but isn't he going to go ahead and sell to an idol worshiper? And so therefore you do have a problem over here. But the Gemara says he answered, do you think he's only willing to sell it to an idol worshiper, but he wouldn't sell it to a Jew? He would sell it to whoever. It's true. He might sell to an Ovid Kochavim, but we have a Talinon, we can be Talinon Lakula, we can say that maybe he'll sell it to a Jew, which he certainly would be willing to do, and so therefore that's why that is permitted. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei, we have the following question. If the place is a place where the minhag, the custom is to sell small animals to the kusim were those who their conversion to Judaism was questionable, and also they didn't follow all the mitzvahs. So if the makam was to sell them, if the minhag of hamakam was to sell them small animals, we could do that. And shalo limchor ein mocher, and if the minhag is not to sell it to them, we don't sell it to them. Now, what's the issue over here? In my time, and what's the reason? What would be the concern of selling to kusim? Ilema mishum dechashidi aravi. Now, if you're going to say that the concern is that there's a concern of bestiality, like we mentioned in the Mishnah, if that's what's going on over here, umi chashidi, but is that really true? Is there really a concern by kusim of bestiality? That's actually not true. V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa, ein ma'amidin behema b'pundakos shel ovdei kochavim. You're not allowed to have animals, place animals by the inns of the ovdei kochavim. Again, we mentioned this earlier because there might be a concern of bestiality. Zacharim eitzel, zacharim, males by males, unakevas eitzel nakevas, even females by females, meaning even if the owner of the inn is a male and the animal's a male, even if the animal's a female and the owner is a female, so there's less concern, still you're not allowed to. We don't even say that it's we don't even need to say that it's problematic if it's females by males and males by females, then you really have a concern of bestiality. And furthermore, says the Brisa, ve'ein mosrin behema l'roa shalahen. You can't give over an animal to a shepherd of theirs, again of the ovdei kochavim. Again, there's this concern of bestiality. And furthermore, ve'ein miyachten imoim, you can't be alone with them. That's a different concern. That's because there's a concern of shvichas damim. They might murder you. Ve'ein mosrin lehem tinok lelamdo sefer. You also can't give them a child that they should teach the child. This is talking about secular knowledge. Ulalamdo umnus, or teach a craft. That's also a problem. Rashi says there's a few concerns there. Ve'ein mosrin lehem tinok demoshchi leilaminos, that they're going to bring them to heresy. V'yod mishum mishkav zachar. There's also a concern of mishkav zachar, a male with a male. They're going to be together with the child. Ve'ein mosarna olav d'chsiv davak b'ishto v'lo b'zachar. They're commanded when it comes to mishkav zachar, so you can't give them a child to learn with and to learn a craft. Avol ma'amidin behema b'pundakos shel kusim. But says the Brisa, all of that is true by the ovdei kochavim. But by the kusim, it's fine. You can have animals by the inns of the kusim. Zacharim eitzel nekevas, unekevas eitzel zacharim, even males by females and females by males. Ve'ein tzarich lomer zacharim eitzel zacharim, unekevas eitzel nekevas. Certainly you could do males by males and females by females. There's no concern of revia. There's no concern of bestiality by the kusim. Umosrin behema l'roa shalin. You can give animals over to their shepherds. Umiyachad and imoim. You could be alone with them. Umosrin lamtinok lalamdo sefer, lamdo umnus. You could give over a child to them, that he should teach the child secular knowledge, that he should teach the child a craft. And so the point is alma lo chashidi. So you see that when it comes to the kusim, that there is no real concern in terms of bestiality. So that cannot be the concern. And again, this is all going to go back to the fact that it says that in a place where the minhag is to sell to kusim behemadaki, you can. If the minhag is not, then you're not allowed. So we'll get back to that. And the Gemara continues, v'yo tanya. And further we learned in a brisa, ein mochen lahem lo zayin v'lo klei zayin. You're not allowed to sell to them weapons and other types of vessels that go together with weapons. This is to ovdei kochavim, to idol worshippers. Ve'in mashchizin lahen asaz zayin. You're not allowed to sharpen their weapons. Ve'in mochen lahen lo sadin v'lo kolorin v'lo kevolim v'lo shalshalos shel barzel. And you can't sell to them sadin, which are stocks. Those were things to secure a prisoner's feet, and kolorin and kevolim and shalshalos, all different kinds of chains to secure the prisoners. Again, all of these things you're not allowed to sell to the ovdei kochavim. But here in this brisa it says echad oved kochavim v'echad kusi. You can't sell to oved kochavim these kinds of weapons, these kinds of chains, and also to a kusi you're not allowed to do that. And so the Gemara again says, my time, and now what's the reason we're concerned? If we're not selling these weapons to the kusim because we're concerned they're going to murder with it, but are we really concerned that they're murderers? We just said above that you're allowed to be in seclusion together with the kusim. Apparently we're not concerned that they're going to murder. And so Ella rather must be, what's the reason for all of this? Why do we have these prohibitions by the kusim if there's no concern for bestiality, there's no concern for murder? Mishum da'asi lezvuni lovet kochavim. It must be the only reason you're not allowed to do these things is because they're going to go ahead and they're going to sell it to the idol worshippers. And so therefore, going back to what we were originally discussing in terms of selling to a Jew where there's a suspicion he might sell to an idol worshipper, that should be problematic, just like it's a problem to sell to a kusi because he might sell to an ovid kochavim. Now, if you're going to say maybe there's a difference between a kusi and a yisrael who's suspect, because you'll say kusi lo avid teshuva. Kusi, he's not going to do teshuva, he won't repent. But yisrael avid teshuva. But maybe you'll say that a yisrael is going to do teshuva. Rashi explains lo avid teshuva lachzor bo v'lochash l'divrei chachamim shasru limchor lo avid kochavim. He's not going to do teshuva and he's not going to repent, and so there's a concern therefore again that he's going to sell to an ovid kochavim. But the Jew is avid teshuva, he'll do teshuva. V'tzayis, he'll listen. V'lo mazvan le lo avid kochavim, he won't sell to an ovid kochavim. Kochavim, maybe you'll say that's the difference. V'amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, but Rav Nachman said that Rabba bar Avua said, Kederech she'amru asur limchor l'oved kochavim, just like they said, we're not allowed to sell to the oved kochavim, to the idol worshipper, kach asur limchor l'Yisrael, hachashid limchor l'oved kochavim. So too, you can't sell the animals to a Jew who's suspect that he might go ahead and sell it to the oved kochavim. And so therefore, again, we really do have a question over here. How was it possible for Rabbah to sell the donkey to this Jew who was suspect that he would sell it to the Oved Kochavim? And so the Gemara says when Rabbah heard this, he actually realized he was mistaken. So Royat Basrei Talosa Parsi, so he ran after him 3 parsa. He ran after the person who bought it from him. He wanted to buy it back. Parsa B'chola. Some say it wasn't 3 parsa that he ran, but it was 1 parsa, but it was in the sand, which is the equivalent. And he wasn't able to reach him. He wasn't able to get it. He wasn't able to buy it back. Rashi says, Rabbah Basrei Dau Yisrael. Rabbah ran after that Jew in order to buy back the donkey. The point is he was in an area where it was hard to walk, according to the other version, 1 parsa in that area where there was sand. He wasn't able to reach him. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Dimi bar Abba. Rav Dimi bar Abba says, just like it is forbidden to sell to an idol worshiper weapons, also to sell to robbers who are Jewish, you can't sell them weapons. The Gemara says, Hey Chidami, what exactly is the case over here? If we're talking about Jews where there's a suspicion they might murder, so Pshita, that's obvious you can't sell them weapons. That's the same thing as selling the weapons to an Oved Kochavim. If it's a Jew that you don't suspect is going to kill, so Amailo, why not? Why can't you sell it? And the Gemara says, Li'olam delo katel. Really, we're talking about robbers who are Jewish who would not kill. But here, what are we talking about? B'mishmuta. We're talking about that they take the money in a sneaky kind of way. Sometimes they're going to use the weapons in order to save themselves if they're caught. Rashi explains, Hachi Garsina in the text as follows, Li'om delo katel. They're really not suspect of murder. Uv'mishmuta di'avid latzulei nafshe. Listim hashomet mamon miad bailav. These are robbers who they take money from the owner of a nimlat v'holech. They kind of escape. They try not to be caught. Now, if the owner chases after these listim, he's going to fight back and save himself. And so therefore this person is now going to lose his money. He's going to use these weapons to fight back, and that's why you're not allowed to sell these weapons to the Jewish person who's the robber. Again, even if the Jewish person is not going to kill, but he's still going to use these weapons in order to be able to keep the money when he takes the money. And so therefore, again, we're not allowed to sell the weapons to the Oved Kochavim, and you can't sell to the Listim Yisrael as well. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Ein mochen lehen trisin. You're not allowed to sell to the Oved Kochavim trisin, which are shields. V'yesh omer mochen lehen trisin. Some say you could sell shields to the Oved Kochavim. The Gemara says, my time, what's the reason? Ilema mishum demignu alayu. If the reason is because they're for protection, meaning what's the reason of the one who says you can't sell shields? If the reason is because they use it for protection, we don't want them to be able to protect themselves. If that's true, you shouldn't be able to sell wheat or barley to an Oved Kochavim because they're going to use it to sustain themselves. So that can't be the reason, because you certainly are allowed to sell wheat and barley to a non-Jew. So what is the reason why you wouldn't be able to sell shields to the non-Jew? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav. Rav says, we should note over here that the Mesoras Hashas changes it from Rav to Rav Papa according to the Rosh, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph.